So, picture this. It's a random Tuesday evening and you're sitting at your kitchen table. Maybe there's a half-empty mug of tea going cold next to you, and you're doing that thing where you open your banking app, stare at the number for about 5 seconds, close it, then open it again like somehow the balance is going to be different. And it's not that the number is catastrophically low, you're not in a crisis, but it's also not moving. It's just kind of sitting there, the same, month after month. You're working, you're not being reckless, you haven't bought a boat or a sports car, but somehow, no matter what you do, the needle doesn't really move in a meaningful direction. And that feeling, that low-grade, quiet frustration of doing everything you think you're supposed to be doing and still feeling financially stuck, that feeling is more common than most people will ever admit out loud. My name is Emmy, and honestly, I spend probably way more time than is healthy thinking about money. Not just the numbers and the spreadsheets, but the psychology behind it all. Why some people seem to almost effortlessly accumulate wealth over time, and why others, despite genuinely trying, despite working hard, despite caring, just can't seem to get ahead. And what I've come to realize, after reading more financial psychology research than anyone invited me to, and after having some pretty uncomfortable conversations with myself about my own money habits, is that the gap isn't usually about income, not entirely. It's about where the money goes after it arrives. And this is where it gets interesting and uncomfortable, because there is a set of financial behaviors, a set of what I'd loosely call investments, that people who are struggling financially tend to make over and over again, generation after generation, and they don't look obviously wrong. In fact, a lot of them feel completely justified in the moment. Some of them even feel smart. That's honestly the most insidious part. So that's what we're going to talk about today. 7 investments, and I'm using that word loosely because not all of these are investments in the traditional sense. 7 financial decisions that quietly and systematically keep people broke, not because the people making them are foolish, but because nobody ever explained why these decisions are actually so expensive. By the end of this, I genuinely think you're going to look at some of your own money habits with completely different eyes. And that shift in perspective, that's where change actually starts. All right, let's start here, because this one is everywhere. And before I get into it, I want to say I am not here to tell you not to enjoy your money. That's not the conversation. Life is supposed to be lived. Experiences matter. Joy is real, okay? But there's a very specific financial trap hidden inside what we've culturally rebranded as self-care and treating yourself, and it's worth looking at clearly. Here's the thing about depreciating assets. A depreciating asset is basically anything that loses value the moment or shortly after you acquire it. Cars are the classic example. You drive a new car off a lot and it immediately drops something like 10 to 15% in value. By year 5, most cars have lost 40 to 60% of what you paid for them. That's not a purchase, that's a slow bleed. And yet, for a huge portion of people who are financially struggling, a new car, or a car that's newer and more expensive than they can reasonably afford, is one of the first major financial commitments they make, because it feels important, because it signals something about where you are in life. But it goes way beyond cars. Think about the latest phone upgrade that happens every single year, even when your current phone works perfectly fine. Think about the designer items bought not because you genuinely love fashion, but because of how they make you feel when other people notice them. Think about the furniture that gets replaced every few years not because it broke, but because a different aesthetic is trending now. All of this is money going in a direction that doesn't come back. It's spending that masquerades as an investment in yourself. And here's the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. Are these purchases filling a genuine need, or are they filling an emotional void? Are they about joy, or are they about how you want to be perceived? Because the research is genuinely striking on this. People who are in financial stress buy visible status symbols at notably higher rates. It's a psychological response. When your internal sense of security feels shaky, External symbols of status temporarily soothe that anxiety. So the very financial pressure that's causing the stress is also fueling the spending that makes the stress worse. It's a loop. The actionable shift here isn't to stop spending on things you enjoy, it's to get honest about the why. Before a significant discretionary purchase, just pause and ask yourself, am I buying this because it genuinely adds value to my daily life, or am I buying it because of how it makes me feel in the eyes of others? One of those is a reasonable transaction. The other is renting a feeling, and renting feelings, it turns out, is extraordinarily expensive. Point 2. Investing in lottery tickets, get-rich-quick schemes, and financial shortcuts. This one is genuinely hard to talk about without sounding condescending, so I'm going to try to be really careful here, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about why this happens and what it actually means about the people involved. Lottery tickets, and by extension, scratch cards, sports betting apps, high-risk crypto opportunities, and whatever the latest viral get-rich-quick scheme is, are not primarily purchased by people who are being irrational or stupid. They're purchased overwhelmingly by people who feel like the traditional financial system doesn't have a path for them. And honestly, that feeling isn't entirely wrong. If you grew up without financial education, without family wealth to lean on, without connections or capital, the slow, conventional path, save a little each month, invest for 30 years, retire comfortably, can feel completely abstract, almost like it's written for someone else's life. And so when someone spends $40 or $50 or even $100 a month on lottery tickets, what they're really doing is purchasing hope. They're buying a mental space where a different life is possible. And I don't say that to make it sound noble, because in terms of expected financial return, the lottery is a horrific investment. The odds are structured so that you will, over time, lose significantly more than you gain. That's just math. But the emotional function it's serving is real, and dismissing it as stupidity misses the point entirely. The same logic applies to every financial shortcut that promises outsized returns for minimal effort or knowledge. And look, there are people who have made legitimate fortunes in crypto, in day trading, in speculative investments. But for every one of those stories, there are hundreds of quiet stories of people who lost money they couldn't afford to lose, chasing the same outcome. The problem isn't that shortcuts don't occasionally work. It's that they're priced as though they're reliable, and they're not. And the people who can least afford to lose are often the ones most drawn to them, because the conventional path feels so inaccessible. The reframe here is this: energy and money spent on financial shortcuts is energy not spent building actual, boring, reliable financial skills. Learning how compound interest works, building an emergency fund, understanding what index funds are and how they behave over time. These things are not exciting. They do not make good social media content, but they work in a way that lottery tickets simply don't. Point 3. Investing in other people's financial emergencies and calling it treating yourself. Okay, this one. This one is the one that I find the most emotionally complicated, because the behavior itself, helping people you love when they're in trouble, is not wrong. It is genuinely good and human and important. So I want to be precise here because there's a specific pattern that shows up particularly in lower-income communities, and it has a meaningful economic cost that rarely gets acknowledged. There's a term in financial sociology, the kin network tax. Basically, when you come from a family or community that has faced financial hardship for generations, there is often a very real and very strong social expectation that if you start doing better financially, you share it. If you get a raise, someone knows about it and needs help with rent. If you manage to save a little, there's a family emergency. If you start getting ahead, somehow the requests start coming, loans that never get repaid, financial commitments you took on out of guilt or love or obligation. And again, I want to be clear, helping family is not inherently a financial mistake. Connection and community matter enormously. But there is a version of this where one person's entire financial progress gets slowly dismantled by the needs of everyone around them, and the person this is happening to often doesn't even feel like they can say no, because the needs are real, and the relationships are real, and the guilt is crushing. I knew someone, a woman who grew up in a genuinely low-income household, who had been, over about a decade, the financial backstop for her extended family, her siblings, her parents, cousins, sometimes people who were only loosely connected to her. She was good with money in terms of her own habits, disciplined, thoughtful, but every time she got ahead, someone in her orbit needed help, and the help was real emergencies, real pain. But the cumulative effect was that at 40 years old, she had almost nothing saved, and she was exhausted, and she felt like a bad person for even noticing that. The hardest financial lesson some people have to learn is that you cannot build a lifeboat by constantly